Lucas Ramirez had always taken the late-night bus home after his shifts, but tonight something felt different the moment he stepped aboard. The air was damp and heavy, clinging to his skin like fog, and the passengers seated inside didn't look alive. They sat frozen, pale faces turned toward the windows, as if they were waiting for something. Just behind him, Ava Morgan hurried onto the bus at the last second, clutching her bag tightly. She noticed it too. The driver's face hidden in shadow, the unnatural silence that pressed down on the aisle, the faint sound of whispers echoing from nowhere. Neither of them knew it yet, but this ride wasn't taking them home. It was carrying them somewhere far darker where reflections moved on their own. And stepping off the bus meant stepping into nothing at all. The bus pulled up with a groan that rattled through the empty street, and the sound sent a shiver straight down my spine. It was late, much later than I ever planned to be out, but the night had swallowed the city whole, leaving only the dull orange glow of broken streetlights to guide me. The air was thick with silence, heavy in a way that made even my footsteps sound wrong. When the doors of the bus opened, they did so slowly, like they hadn't been used in years, metal scraping against metal until the hiss of air announced that it was ready to take me in. I hesitated, but only for a second. After all, it was just a bus. I told myself that over and over as I climbed the steps. My hand brushed against the cold railing, and I felt how slick and damp it was, as though someone had just wiped it down with wet soil. Inside, the lights flickered above me, bathing the long aisle in a pale, washed-out glow. The driver sat rigid in his seat, hands gripping the wheel so tightly that his knuckles bulged. His face remained hidden in shadow, and no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't make out his features. He didn't speak, didn't even nod when I stepped on. I scanned the seats. A handful of passengers sat scattered throughout the bus, but none of them looked my way. Their stillness unsettled me. Some leaned against the windows, staring blankly outside, while others sat upright, hands resting on their laps in a way that felt too precise, too deliberate. Not one of them shifted, blinked, or acknowledged my presence. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to keep moving, choosing a seat near the middle. The cushions sank under me, colder than I expected, almost damp, as though no one had sat there for a very long time. When the doors shut behind me, the sound echoed like a final seal, and the bus lurched forward. I turned to the window, watching the city crawl past in shadows. The familiar streets I knew seemed distorted under the glow of the flickering lamps, buildings leaning ever so slightly as though they were bending away from the bus itself. The windows reflected dim fragments of the interior, and I caught sight of the old woman across from me. She wore a gray shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her real eyes were fixed on the passing streets, unblinking, yet in the reflection, her face twisted into a smile so wide it stretched her thin lips far beyond what seemed human. My throat tightened. I blinked hard and glanced back at her real face. It was blank, expressionless, eyes fixed forward like glass. But when I looked at the window again, the smile in the reflection remained, as though it was aware of me, aware of my fear. I turned my gaze down to my lap, refusing to look up again. My hands trembled slightly, and the sound of the bus grew louder, the rattle of loose bolts and groaning metal filling the air like the heartbeat of some great, rusted creature. The passengers never moved. Not one of them shifted or breathed the way they should have. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the hum of the engine and the faint creak of the bus's frame. The air grew colder the farther we went, pressing against my skin like icy fingers. I rubbed my arms trying to shake off the chill, but the heaviness in the air only deepened. It felt like the bus wasn't just carrying us forward, it was dragging us down into something deeper, something I didn't want to imagine. I glanced toward the driver again, hoping for some reassurance, but his posture never changed. His head leaned forward, slightly tilted, and though the dim glow caught the outline of his jaw, the rest of his face was swallowed by shadow. My stomach twisted as a thought crossed my mind. Maybe there was no face at all. I turned back to the window, desperate for something familiar outside. But the city I thought I knew seemed to fade. The streets stretched too long, corners twisted in ways that made no sense, and buildings I had seen all my life appeared hollow, their windows empty like dark eyes watching us pass. I pressed my hand against the glass, needing to feel that it was real, and the cold burned my skin. For the briefest second I thought I felt something press back from the other side. I pulled my hand away quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs. My pulse roared in my ears, and I couldn't help but glance back at the reflection of the old woman. The smile in the glass hadn't gone. If anything, it was wider now, stretched so far that her teeth looked sharper, gleaming faintly in the flickering light. Her real face remained still, blank as stone. I gripped the edge of my seat, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light, just exhaustion. But deep down I already knew the truth. This was no ordinary ride, and whatever I had stepped into wasn't meant for me. As the bus groaned onward, the reflection's head slowly began to turn, even though the real woman never moved at all. The bus rattled as it pressed deeper into the night, and with every mile that passed, I felt the air grow heavier, as though the walls of the vehicle were closing in. The familiar rhythm of city life had vanished outside the windows. No headlights cut through the dark, no pedestrians lingered on sidewalks, not even a stray animal crossed the road. It was as if the bus had pulled me into a place that existed apart from the world I knew, a stretch of streets that belonged to nothing but silence and shadows. The lights above flickered with an irregular pattern, buzzing faintly before plunging everything into momentary black. Each time the darkness came, my stomach knotted, because when the light returned, I was never fully sure if the passengers were in the same positions as before. Sometimes their heads seemed tilted differently, or their hands were arranged at sharper angles. It was subtle enough to doubt my own eyes, yet wrong enough to leave me cold with dread. I glanced toward the old woman again, her gray shawl wrapped like a shroud. She hadn't moved an inch, but her reflection in the glass was alive. It didn't just stare at me anymore. It leaned closer, pressing its face against the window with a slow, unnatural bend of the neck. The grin in the reflection stretched wider, revealing gums darkened and rotten. I swallowed hard, my throat painfully dry, and forced myself to look away. I lowered my gaze to my knees, counting the seconds between each flicker of the lights, trying to anchor myself to something normal. But beneath me, the floor began to creak, faint at first, then louder, as if something was crawling under the seats. A scraping sound followed, like fingernails dragging against metal. I pressed my feet closer together, terrified that something might reach up and grab me. The smell came next. At first it was faint, just a metallic temps that reminded me of rust. But soon it thickened, filling my nose with a nauseating stench, wet soil, mold, and the unmistakable sweetness of decay. It clung to the back of my throat, making me gag. I covered my nose with the sleeve of my jacket, but the stench still pushed through, saturating every breath. I tried to distract myself by staring toward the front, but the sight of the driver only deepened my unease. His posture was perfectly still, hands welded to the wheel, but his head had shifted since I last looked. It hung slightly lower, tilted at an angle that seemed impossible for a human neck to sustain. The longer I stared, the more I noticed how unnatural his outline was. His shoulders seemed to narrow, his arms too long, his spine too straight, like he wasn't a man at all but a shape wearing human skin. The rearview mirror above him flickered faintly, catching fragments of light. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw his face in it, smiling directly at me. The lips in that reflection curled upward in a grotesque grin, stretching impossibly wide. Yet when I blinked and looked again, his head was nothing but shadow. My hands were slick with sweat now, my palms pressed hard against my thighs, as if that would steady the tremor in my body. I wanted to stand, to shout, to demand answers, but every part of me was locked in place, pinned by an unseen weight. My chest rose and fell too quickly, every breath sharp and uneven. A sound pulled me back toward the old woman, a faint tapping like a fingernail against glass. My eyes snapped to the window, and I saw her reflection grinning wider than ever. Its finger raised to tap the inside of the glass as though trying to get my attention. 1, 2, 3 taps, steady and deliberate. Her real body sat perfectly still, hands folded neatly on her lap. I turned away quickly, staring down at the dirty floor of the bus. My pulse thundered in my ears, but when the lights flickered again, I risked another glance. The reflection was gone, not smiling, not staring, simply gone. Yet the old woman's real body was still there, unchanged, unmoving. The scraping under the seats grew louder, joined now by a faint whisper that seemed to curl around my ears. I couldn't make out words, only a low, dragging murmur that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It felt like the sound was inside my skull, rattling against my bones rather than traveling through the air. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but the whispers pushed through, steady and patient, as if they had been waiting for me all along. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a movement where there shouldn't have been any. The old woman's reflection had returned, only this time it wasn't in the window. It was sitting in the empty seat across the aisle, facing me directly, grinning as though it had finally stepped free. The bus swerved suddenly, throwing me against the cold metal frame of the seat. My heart leapt into my throat, and for a moment I thought the entire vehicle would tip over. I steadied myself, gripping the seat in front of me, and that was when I noticed the world outside had changed. The familiar roads and cracked sidewalks of the city were gone. In their place stretched an endless forest, trees packed so tightly together that the headlights only illuminated their gnarled bark and skeletal branches. Their shapes loomed and twisted as if they were pressing inward, trying to crush the bus in their grasp. I knew this route by heart, and there had never been a forest here. I pressed my forehead to the glass, desperate to see something familiar. But every direction revealed the same suffocating woods. The branches scraped against the windows with long, dragging strokes, sounding like nails on chalkboard. My breath fogged the glass, and in the mist I caught sight of my reflection. Only, it wasn't me. The figure in the window had my face, but its smile stretched ear to ear, teeth sharp, eyes dark and gleaming with hunger. My stomach twisted and I recoiled, shutting my eyes. When I opened them again, the reflection had returned to normal, but I no longer trusted what I saw. The passengers began to stir. It started with small movements, a jerk of a shoulder, a twitch of a hand, a tilt of the head. The sound of joints cracking echoed faintly in the cabin. I froze, holding my breath, every nerve in my body screaming for me not to draw attention. Slowly, Almost in unison, their heads began to turn. Their pale eyes locked onto me, one after another, until I felt trapped under their collective gaze. Their faces were drained of all life, skin sagging, lips dry and cracked. But their stares burned with a strange intensity, as though they had all been waiting for this moment. I shrank back into my seat, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I tried to convince myself they would turn away, that I was imagining it. But they didn't. The longer I sat there, the more their eyes dug into me, hollow and endless. I couldn't take it anymore. I shut my eyes, clutching the edge of my seat, and when I opened them again, they were all facing forward again, as if nothing had happened. My breath came out in sharp bursts, shaky and uneven. The forest outside pulsed with a strange rhythm, branches swaying though there was no wind. I could swear I heard faint whispers carried through the scratching of the bark, voices calling from between the trees. My skin prickled as though something outside was aware of me, pressing its presence against the thin glass barrier. I wanted to scream, to beg the bus to stop, but my throat was locked tight with terror. The overhead lights flickered once more, plunging us into darkness for a split second. In that instant, I saw every passenger standing in the aisle. Their faces hovered inches from mine, eyes wide and empty, mouths hanging open in silent screams. The lights snapped back on, and they were seated again, lifeless and still. My heart thundered so loud I could barely hear over it. I forced myself to look out the window again, hoping for even the slightest sign of an exit. That was when I noticed something worse. The reflection staring back at me wasn't copying my movements anymore. While I sat frozen, terrified, my reflection was leaning closer, its grin spreading wider, eyes narrowing with amusement. It tilted its head to the side, studying me like prey. My hands shook as I raised them slowly, and my reflection stayed perfectly still, smiling back at me. I bit down on my lip until I tasted blood, the metallic temps filling my mouth. The bus rumbled on, deeper into the forest, deeper into the dark, as if there was no end to this place. The branches outside scratched harder, harder still, until it sounded like claws tearing through the metal itself. I wanted to look away, to curl into myself and hide, but I couldn't. My eyes were locked on that grinning reflection, a sick certainty growing in my chest. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't me, and worse, it wanted out. The bus moaned and groaned as it pressed deeper into the endless forest, the sound of the engine blending with the scratching of branches against the windows. Each passing minute made the air inside heavier, as if the oxygen was being drained away, leaving only something stale and cold to breathe. My chest rose and fell quickly, desperate for air, but it felt like I was inhaling smoke. The whispers began again, faint at first, curling through the aisle like drifting fog. They weren't words I could recognize, just low tones that scratched at my ears and settled into the pit of my stomach. I pressed my palms to my ears, hoping to block them out, but it was useless. The whispers weren't just sounds anymore, they were inside my head, sliding through the cracks of my thoughts, burrowing deeper the more I tried to resist. Every syllable made me colder, as though something was reaching into me and hollowing me out. The passengers began to move again. This time there was no mistaking it. Their heads jerked in sharp, unnatural angles, necks bending too far to one side before snapping back into place. Their mouths opened wide, too wide, their jaws unhinging like broken mannequins. No breath escaped them, no sound at all, only the faint grinding of bone as their movements echoed in the cabin. Their eyes remained locked forward, pale and milky, but I knew they were aware of me. The smell of decay thickened, flooding my senses. It was sweet and foul, the stench of rotting wood mixed with something metallic, something like blood. I gagged, covering my mouth with both hands, but the odor clawed its way in anyway, suffocating and sharp. My eyes watered as I looked toward the front of the bus, desperate for escape, for some sign of life from the driver. His head had shifted again. Where before it only leaned at an odd angle, now it hung backward, neck stretched unnaturally long as if gravity no longer obeyed him. His face was finally visible under the dim glow, and it was worse than I imagined. His mouth stretched into a frozen laugh, lips torn at the corners from how far they had been pulled. His eyes were nothing but deep sockets, black and endless, as though something had scooped them out and left only the void behind. His hand still gripped the wheel, stiff and unmoving, but the bus seemed to steer itself, the wheel turning smoothly on its own. I wanted to stand, to scream, to run to the back and demand the doors open, but my body refused me. My legs trembled but wouldn't obey, weighed down as if invisible chains held me in place. My chest ached with the effort of breathing. The whispers grew louder, clearer now, no longer just sounds but almost forming words. I couldn't understand them, yet they filled me with terror, as though every syllable was a command I wasn't meant to hear. My eyes drifted unwillingly to the windows again. The reflection of the forest pulsed in rhythm with the whispers, branches bending closer, pressing harder against the glass. In the midst of it, my reflection stared back, no longer mimicking me. It leaned forward with that sick grin, tilting its head like a predator watching prey. Its lips moved in silence, whispering along with the voices in my head. A sudden sound broke through the noisy tap, faint but sharp, from the window beside me. I snapped my gaze to it, and my stomach dropped. The old woman was still seated across the aisle, her hands folded, her face expressionless. But in the glass, her reflection grinned wider than ever before, eyes locked on mine. She raised one finger and tapped the inside of the reflection with slow, deliberate force. A smear of red appeared where her finger pressed, trailing down the glass like blood. My heart pounded violently, and I tried to shift away, but my body remained frozen. The reflection tapped again, leaving another streak. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would stop. But even in the dark behind my eyelids I saw flashes of that grin, that tapping hand. When I opened my eyes again, the reflection of the old woman hadn't returned to her place in the glass. Instead, it stood in the aisle, closer to me now, grinning as though it had finally stepped free. Its head tilted forward slowly, the grin widening until the skin of its cheeks cracked. My breath hitched, cold air burning in my lungs. And then, for the first time since I boarded the bus, the old woman's real body began to turn. Her head creaked unnaturally as it shifted toward me, her face blank and lifeless. But her reflection no longer copied her. It only smiled, and it was moving closer. The bus shuddered violently before coming to a sudden stop, throwing me forward so hard that my chest slammed against the seat in front of me. Pain shot through my ribs, but it barely registered compared to the dread that flooded me. The sound of the engine died into a hollow silence, and for a moment it felt as if the entire world outside had gone still. I dared to lift my head, my eyes darting to the windows, desperate for some clue of where we were. There was nothing. No forest, no streets, no city lights. The windows showed only black, an endless void pressing against the glass. It wasn't night anymore, it was emptiness, thick and suffocating. Like the bus had been swallowed by something vast and hungry. My reflection didn't meet my eyes this time. It wasn't even in the window. It was standing in the aisle, grinning, its hollow stare locked on me as if it had been waiting all along. The air inside the bus grew unbearable, thick and heavy as though it was alive, pressing against my lungs, stealing every breath I tried to take. My vision blurred at the edges, my heartbeat pounding in my throat, loud enough to drown out everything else. Then I heard the faint hiss of the bus doors opening. I turned my head slowly, terrified of what I might see. And there it was, the gaping entrance, beyond which was nothing but that endless black void. No ground, no sky, no stars. Just the promise of something worse than falling. The passengers began to rise one by one. Their movements were stiff, puppet-like, as if strings were pulling their limbs from above. Bones cracked, joints popped, but they kept moving, shuffling into the aisle with pale, empty eyes fixed straight ahead. They didn't hesitate. One after another, they walked to the open doors and stepped into the void, vanishing instantly into the darkness. No sound, no fall, no trace of them left behind. Just gone. I tried to scream, but my throat was locked, my body rigid against the seat. My reflection moved closer, slow and deliberate, its grin stretched so wide now that the corners of its mouth split into ragged gashes. My stomach lurched as I realized blood was dripping down its chin, though I hadn't seen it eat or move. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, like embers buried deep in ash. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling my head with a chorus of voices layered on top of each other. I couldn't understand the words, but I could feel them, pressing against me, wrapping around me like chains. My legs twitched against my will, my hands lifting from my lap, even though I hadn't commanded them to move. It was as if something else had slipped inside me, steering me like the driver's stiff, lifeless hands steered the wheel. I forced my gaze toward the front, desperate for help, but the driver was no longer facing forward. His head had rotated fully around, the hollow sockets staring straight at me. The torn grin on his face seemed to widen, and though his jaw never moved, I heard a laugh vibrating through the bus. Low at first, then rising, filling every corner, rattling through my bones. The last few passengers shuffled off, disappearing into the black outside. I was alone now, except for my reflection, which loomed over me. My body betrayed me, rising slowly from the seat, my legs carrying me forward against my will. My hands reached out to steady myself, but it wasn't me who moved them. It was something else, something that had claimed me the way the void claimed the others. The doors hissed wider as I approached. The cold from outside, whatever outside, was poured in, seeping into my skin until I couldn't feel my fingers. My reflection stood inches away, its face nearly touching mine, its grin stretching beyond human limits. Its lips parted, and though I heard nothing, I felt the words echo directly in my skull. You were never supposed to leave. The driver's head tilted further, snapping bones, echoing like gunshots. The whispers swelled into a roar, and before I could fight back, my legs took the final step forward. The black void swallowed me whole. But the strangest part, the most horrifying part, wasn't being pulled into that nothingness. It was what I saw in the instant before I disappeared. Through the window of the bus, in the seat where I had been sitting all along, my reflection remained. It sat calmly, smiling faintly, watching me vanish as though I had been the reflection all along. And the bus began to move again, carrying it away into the dark, as though I had never existed at all.